We're back today to talk about authenticity in marriage, or actually the lack thereof. One of the biggest problems that we see is that most people have been taught to not be authentic in order to preserve the connection. If you have any kind of like trauma history, or if you have any attachment wounding, it almost takes a lot of, it's about unlearning some of the things that we've learned to survive or to keep close connections with people in order to truly be authentic. And sometimes this is happening below the consciousness. Like we don't even know we're doing it.
Right.
So we want to talk about this because this, obviously, if we're not authentic in our relationships, we're not going to have healthy relationships in the long term.
Yeah.
We're going to have a relationship that's based on not the truth. And so that just can't last, not in a healthy way.
Right.
So today what we want to talk about is what gets in the way of being authentic. What are some of the barriers that we see? The impact that this has on the health of your relationship, how this shows up in particular. And then we're going to talk about what to do about it. Basically, what does authenticity really mean? How do we define that? And what that looks like. And then we're going to talk about the 4 things that we believe you must have in order to create a healthy, authentic relationship. It's hard to do this stuff, but with a little bit of courage, it's 100% worth it, because that's where true freedom comes. That's like a relationship that's based on the truth of who you are and the freedom to be truly who you are in that healthy, loving relationship. Like that is total freedom. There's nothing better than that.
Exactly.
You can't have anything in this life that would be worth more than that. So with that said, Ned and Kelly are back joining me again today. So welcome, you guys. And I want to turn it over to you right now and ask, what do you notice about people showing up in dishonest ways, even when they recognize it and they're trying to be authentic? What gets in the way of that?
Yeah. So thank you for having us. We always love being here and
pleasure
talking about this stuff. I think one of the things that gets in the way for people in terms of being authentic is just fear. People are really scared to show up and be who they are. I know for me, for a long time in my life, I was scared to be my authentic self. And I think probably everyone has some version of this, especially like with your family of origin, when you were younger and, maybe you were made to feel wrong or bad if you were being authentic, if you were showing up. For me, it was, I'm too much, I'm too loud, I'm too big, I'm too honest, right? I'm too truthful. I just say whatever. And so I was made to feel like that was wrong, that was bad, that's, not a classy way to be.
Yeah.
You need to be a young lady, you need to, right, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's different for all people, but I think there's a lot of fear in just being who you are. And when you're shut down as a little person, that's something that just, it affects different people in different ways, and there's different adaptations around that.
Even with, it's not even about blaming parents. It's like looking at what are the messages that we get. And if we lose connection because we're expressing our needs, our frustrations, our feelings, our wishes, our wants, our hopes, whatever, in really, like you say, big ways, and kids are different in how this shows up, you will learn like, oh, I better not say that. In order to keep the connection. So it can be just as simple as that.
Yeah.
And so I would agree. I would say that fear and that association of that it's not that you have to choose between being authentic and having connection.
Yeah.
That you can't have both. I think a lot of us come to the table in our adult relationships with that belief and that association like hardwired into our nervous systems. And that's why it's physically painful, or, it can make somebody feel panicky in speaking their honest truth in a relationship.
Yeah.
I also think there's a false sense of what, a relationship actually looks like also. And what I mean by that is, the fear to make waves, which are,
you talked about that last night.
The fear just to make waves and be honest and speak your truth about a situation. It's just like, oh, we're so fearful of causing some long-term effect that becomes detrimental to the relationship if I say this, right? And it's not.
Yeah, it's like a limiting belief, really.
Yeah, and I say, for me, I think part of that is modeling. Coming out of the old relationship model for a lot of women, just you don't say anything. And that creates resentment over time. So, but that's the effect and they find themselves, if that's the way you're handling yourself the majority of the time, by not speaking your truth, by not saying anything, oftentimes that turns into resentment and then projecting, and then your experience you start to blame your experience rather than taking ownership of, the true source and cause of what you're creating.
Yeah.
That's
one of the most detrimental impacts, I think, of that lack of authenticity is you don't really know, like you're saying, that you lose yourself. You don't know what is yours and what is theirs, because you start projecting from that place of fear. And you assume that they're going to think something when really it's you that thinks that. And you don't know where that line is.
That's part of that fear,
Yeah. I mean, I think fear is underneath a lot of it, and limiting beliefs and the association of, like, if I rock the boat, if I say something that disrupts the status quo, or if I say something that they might not like, then that means we're going to have problems. That means we're not going to be on good terms. We're not going to feel close anymore. So it's really rewiring that association and knowing it's absolutely, you can be so much closer if you speak your truth. So I wanted to also get into, like, what is the impact that this has if we're not being 100% transparent and authentic and honest in the healthiest ways in our relationship? Because there's the right ways and the wrong ways to be authentic. So we'll talk about that too. But I wanted to
also, what would get in the way too is just what we were programmed with or what was modeled for us. So some of us did not buy into the programming that our parents were trying to feed us, like myself, but a lot of us will take on what was modeled for us, either empathically or just like, because that's all we know. So a lot of people are just doing what they know or what they were programmed with, and they are reinventing and recreating what they saw growing up unconsciously, which is really scary. It's I think is all I would add. But there's nothing better than being in a relationship where you can be authentically yourself and you can say anything and there's no fear around it. There's no fear that your partner is going to leave you. There's no fear that, you're willing to say what needs to be said and even risk the relationship.
That's the ultimate freedom. It's the ultimate freedom. And I think you can't really have true love in a marriage if there's not real authenticity or truth telling in the marriage. Being authentic in a marriage is the only way to know that you're truly loved for and loving from who you really are.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's just like, well, what if this is based on, that's where the fear comes from. It's like, well, they love me this way, but if I tell them the truth about what I'm really thinking or feeling, will that change that? So the sooner you can be authentic, the better, ideally. But a lot of times people will be 10 years into a marriage and realize, oh, I'm not telling my full truth. And it's not too late. It's not too late. You just have to be willing to look at what is the negative impact that this is having. And the discomfort of that has to be greater than the discomfort of stepping out of the inauthentic comfort zone that you maybe were conditioned into.
I think there's one other thing that popped into my mind when we were just speaking is just the lack of know-how.
Yeah. You don't know how.
And I think, and then what that leads to is, though, people just kind of reaching for straws and trying different things. And after numerous, times of being unsuccessful, they kind of give up.
Yeah, and they say it doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. So, and then
see, I can't be authentic. See, I tried and it didn't work, so it's better I just keep it to myself.
Yeah.
Totally. So let's talk about how it is that being not 100% authentic in our relationships impacts the relationship over time. What do you guys notice? I mean, there's a lot of things here, and we did a little bit of a brainstorm beforehand to think this through. What is the number one thing that you see?
One of the big things I see, this is a big one that you talk about a lot.
The loss of identity. That people feel that you know, the inability to be able to authentically express who they are and feeling like they lose themselves to the relationship.
Yep.
And then they blame that loss of identity.
Like, my partner took this from me.
Yeah, on the partner or on the relationship or on the children. They make about the experience external to themselves. And then I hear part of that is I become powerless. I lose my power, my ability to be able to speak up for myself. And that's inauthentic, and it feels terrible.
Yeah, it really does. And I know that a lot of the work that we do with people in the relational piece of things so much involves like finding yourself, becoming the best version of who you are. And you can't do that unless you start with being honest with yourself first.
Right.
You know, and then with your partner so that you know that the relationship is actually built on the truth.
Exactly.
So I think that's such a good point, is like you really have to know who you are first in order to ever be authentic.
Exactly.
What I notice is that there's an incongruence that erodes trust. So you know how you can like feel it, you can pick up on if something is maybe underneath the surface. So if you're not 100% honest with your partner and they can feel that, but they can't really put their finger on it.
Yeah.
Because how you're showing up, the vibrational frequency that you're bringing, the mood, your affect doesn't match your words.
Right.
Because you're not able to speak the truth and be fully authentic.
Right.
Then you're not congruent. And then that creates mistrust. They can't really believe you, and vice versa. You may have that experience with your spouse where you're like, I just feel like something's up and I don't know what it is and I can't put my finger on it, and they're denying it.
Yeah.
Probably because they're afraid to speak that truth.
Yeah.
So that really has a long-term eroding effect, because even if you are telling the truth, how does your partner really know if sometimes you aren't?
Yeah.
Sometimes you are, sometimes you aren't. How are they supposed to know?
And the other part that I hear
so it's like constant triggering.
Yeah, and the other part that I hear from that is like when your partner is inauthentic, a lot of times it looks like to a person who may be triggered like they're hiding something. You know, and then they start, you know,
making meaning.
What is it that you start to fill in the gaps in your own mind, because in the absence of that information.
Right.
And you might make the wrong meaning out of it, but what else? That's just what we're wired to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another thing that we see a lot, in particular, is marriages that are like long marriages. So these people have been together for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and all of a sudden one of the partners is like, I'm done, I want a divorce. And the other partner is literally blindsided. This was out of left field. We were just intimate like last week. And then all of a sudden they want a divorce. What? And they're just totally like dumbfounded. And they just are like, what? And then as you dig and you get to know these clients and their stories, the person who has left has been a person who really hasn't been talking, you know, for a number of years. They've been holding on to resentment. They've been really unhappy, and they're just not talking. Right. It's really prevalent among women in marriage, and it's prevalent among men too. So it's both. You know, I've seen it happen both ways. But where the partners are just like, what? We've been married for years.
And it's so tragic to me when I hear that, because it could have been prevented if the truth had been spoken more clearly. I also think sometimes partners think that they're being more honest than they really are. And they feel like they were clear, but really they weren't.
Right.
Yeah.
So it could be just that you're not even understanding what that truly
means.
means.
Often the case, what you just said right there, Monika. They're being really clear, and they're like actually terrible communicators. Like,
and they're like, I've been saying the same thing for 10 years. And the other person's like, that's not what I got from that.
And what my experience has been is that the vagaries come from, again, a fearful place of trying to say things in a way that you're afraid
your partner might take it,
or You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and this is for a lot of guys. This is where they
Yeah.
find themselves like trying to formulate words that their partner won't.
I can tell when you're being vague. I'm like, I need more examples.
Yeah. A lot of guys find themselves kind of walking on eggshells trying to talk about this in a way that I want you to hear me, but I want to be authentically myself. But it's difficult sometimes because the women sometimes respond in ways we're just like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. And so you try to
Yeah.
that, and it's hard, you know? So
Yeah, that's where the skill comes in, is,
Yeah.
you know, once you are aware of what it is that you want to say or what the truth is for you, and you have that self-awareness, and then that's the first step. Then when you have the willingness to want to leave your comfort zone to speak up, then there's the third barrier of like, now how do I do it in a way that's really going to land, that's not going to cause more problems?
Exactly.
Right, based on the perceptual filter of my spouse,
Right.
and the meaning that could be made out of that. So
yeah. And another thing that we hear a lot from clients is like clients saying, you know, they're just numb, you know, to the relationship. They're numb. They don't know what to feel anymore. They don't
especially
know.
if you're like having to minimize something for yourself, if you're not wanting to speak up and you just have to like accept something, I can see how over time that would lead to numbness. You know, where you're just not connected to yourself anymore, and how you really feel, or if there's an unmet need, or if there's a life dream that hasn't been communicated that you feel like you're not able to go get in the relationship.
Right. Yeah.
You have to numb yourself in order to accept it or tolerate it.
Yeah.
And that's a big red flag.
Yeah.
Big red flag is if you feel numb and checked out. There's usually some kind of truth that has not been spoken.
Exactly.
Yeah. And which causes people to go into their misery stabilizers, addictions, which could be
Self-medicating.
Yeah.
Yep.
Food, alcohol, other women, other men, you know, affairs, emotional affairs, all those kinds of things. When you're not connected with yourself, when you're not doing the work that's required, when you're not connected to your partner, you're going to go and find something else to connect with, something else, someone else, and go outside the marriage instead of turning to your partner and go, this is what I'm dealing with. We drown out the voice that's screaming out from within us with other things and other people instead of like turning to our partner. You know, and that's a big one that we see with the authenticity.
Yep.
Totally.
And you're not being authentic when you're turning outside the marriage.
Well, and it's so much easier to turn outside the marriage than it is to like turn it into the marriage. It's so much more threatening because this is your primary relationship. It's really high stakes. So especially when people turn to say, oh, I have this authentic connection with someone outside of my marriage. It's not really authentic if it's not based in reality, right? If it's just because you can segment parts of your life. I think authenticity involves integrating all parts of your life. And we'll get into what that actually means. Let's talk about what it would take, like, you know, in order to create authenticity so that we can prevent, you know, the numbing and prevent the checking out and the, you know, all of the negative things that come from losing your boundaries, losing yourself, and your marriage possibly prematurely ending. How can, if people are listening to this are like, well, I want to become more authentic. How do I do that?
Yeah.
I would start with saying that first we have to go into what it really means and what we mean when we're talking about authenticity. What does it mean? Like, okay, I'll kind of jump in here and then you guys can add to this too. What I think it means is that we are true to our own selves, which means we're being really real. We're being genuine. We're originally who we are. No one else is like us. We can't be like anybody else. It's like essentially being the most stripped back version of ourselves, the most distilled, when you get rid of all of the stuff, the superficial stuff, the things that we've learned that we've wanted to add on as like our persona. When you strip that back and you just look at like, how do I honestly feel? What do I honestly desire? What do I dream about? What do I need? What do I want to create? The answers to those questions, if you can answer those with total clarity and honesty within your own self first, and then be willing to share that with others,
Yeah.
even if you're afraid to do so, that's how I think of being authentic.
That's
Yeah.
that's the biggest piece here, is just that authenticity and being able to just speak your truth. Because that the truth, telling the truth from a place of love, which again, we talk about a skill set here that's required, because that can be very difficult too if you've been modeled either
Yeah.
a way of not being able to communicate effectively. Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't see that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that becomes a big issue, and that's kind of, again, what I was speaking to earlier. That's what creates the barrier to be able to speak authentically, is just that lack of skill set to be able to convey those ideas that are authentic to ourselves, to our partner,
Mm-hmm.
and the fear around that, and like we talked about, the some of the repercussions from that inability or ineffectiveness to be able to do that in a healthy way.
100%. 100%. I think it's about transparency too. It's like being willing to be seen. A lot of people think that, well, I'm just being honest, and they're talking about their spouse. I'm going to tell you the truth about you. That's not authenticity.
Right.
Authenticity is telling the truth about ourselves and what we see and the meaning that we give it. Right? There's a difference.
And coming from, this is where because of the work that I've done on myself, authenticity to me means that I am speaking and I am being from the right place. We have 3 parts of our psyche. In RLT, Terry Real talks about this, where there are 3 very real parts of us, and any one of them could be showing up at any time. But we want to be coming from our mature, wise adult most of the time, the prefrontal cortex part of ourselves. Because when we're in our adaptive child or our wounded child, we're coming from not the right place when we're talking about being relational with another person. So for me, it's about making sure, where am I? Which version of myself am I dealing with? Which version of myself, of my partner, is talking to me right now? That's that skill. And for me, that's like one of the most important things that's been one of the most important things for me, and to teach clients too, is that inner child work, the work of going inward and figuring out which version of me am I being right now, and doing that with yourself over and over and over and over again. That is the inner child work, and it works like a charm. And so that, to me, is what being authentic is all about. Knowing, who am I being right now? And if you are not in that wise adult version of yourself, to me, you're not being authentic. You're being a child, and that person needs to be given love and attention. But also,
that's like the conditioned part of you. That's not who you really are. I think that's so important, actually, this distinction. When we talk about being authentic and true to ourselves, it's like, well, which part of us are we being true to? And which part of us are we trying to communicate? Because if we let the adaptive child take over, we might be being authentic to that child, but that child's not here. That's in the past. It has to be in the present moment.
Right.
It has to be in the present moment. It can't be the conditioning of the past that's taking over. That's not the same thing. So I think that's such an important distinction.
And most people, 99% of adults, are walking around in their adaptive child, and they are living,
don't even know it,
and they're being from that place, and they don't even know it. And so the skill is teaching people to know, who am I being right now? How do I know? And that's one of the things we all teach our clients is, how do I know I'm in this version of myself? How do I know that? That's the skill to have. Because if you don't know that, 9 times out of 10, chances are you are in your adaptive child. And those are the parts of us we have to learn how to demote and take our hands off the steering wheel of our lives. And that is the work. That is, the solution of how to learn how to be authentic, how to be a mature adult.
Yeah. And I think
yes. Well, yeah, I was going to just piggyback on that and say that that's one of the things that we were talking about is like the 4 things that you must have in order to be authentic. One of them is a high level of self-awareness and self-love. And knowing yourself and knowing which part of you is running the show, which part of you do you want to lead with, and being super honest with yourself. Brene Brown has a really great definition of authenticity. She says, to be authentic, we must cultivate the courage to be imperfect and vulnerable. We have to believe that we are fundamentally worthy of love and acceptance just as we are. I've learned that there's no better way to invite more grace, gratitude, and joy into our lives than by mindfully practicing authenticity. And what she's linking there is that sense of worthiness that you have to have that self-love along with the self-awareness. That's why I put them together, because if you are being self-aware, but you're judging yourself for it, like let's say you feel a certain way about something.
Yeah.
I'm feeling hurt by that, or I'm feeling like I really want this thing in my life, but you don't love yourself, or you judge yourself for it, you're less likely to actually share that or try to censor yourself or try to say, well, I shouldn't feel that, or I shouldn't want that. So I'll just not let that come to the surface.
Right.
So then there's that gap between, I know this about myself, but I'm not willing to share it because I don't love myself enough to do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's so important to realize that in order to really be authentic, we have to not only be self-aware, but come at it from a place of really loving yourself and not judging yourself. And I think you had talked about that a little bit, Kelly, too, about the importance of not judging yourself so that you can bring the truth of your experience forward, even if it's scary. Even if the other person does judge you, if you don't judge yourself and you're coming from a place of, well, this is just the truth, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
It actually invites the kind of people who will honor and respect that into your life.
Exactly.
And it sounds kind of like, and I've noticed a lot of people, they think that being honest is harsh somehow, or it has to sound harsh.
Yeah.
And it's but really, I think that people are most harsh on themselves because they feel in terms of judging themselves, because it's if I say this, I'm being judgmental, and it's like you're talking about, Monika. It's I'm judging myself. I don't love myself enough to just say a basic something or other. And so what I always say is, and it's what Terry always says, holding yourself in warm regard despite your human imperfections. I may not say this the perfect way. I may have done this in the past, but I'm a human being, and I'm, it was wrong what I did, or it wasn't the right way, or I wish I could have done it this way, but I'm still a person worthy of love and affection and cherishing and respect. And I'm going to hold myself in that regard instead of crapping and shitting all over myself. What a lot of people do in their mind. They just bash themselves.
And the thing with me,
100%.
especially in helping guys, is, Kelly and I were having this discussion. She's like, what's one of the things that helps you show up authentically? And I said, I'm very open, honest and unfiltered. Now that we also talked about, I don't express myself unbridled. I do that from a place of being very conscientious, but I speak
we talked about
I speak my truth. And I think that's the part that is that's the freeing part too, is just
the difference between being unfiltered and unbridled.
Yeah. Because I say part of that is because my house is my castle, and I feel like I should be able to express myself and be authentic to myself in my home, around what the topic we're talking about, as that relates to my partner too. because that I also expect that of Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear her truth, because that, for us, that creates a lot of clarity. So there's no vagaries. I understand her,
Mm-hmm.
and that keeps
Mm-hmm.
on a very seamless stretch of healthy relating. So for me, that's really important.
Yeah, that's so great. I mean, that's so freeing to know that you always know where the other person stands,
Yeah.
and you always know that you can speak your truth. And that distinction between unbridled and unfiltered is so important,
Yeah.
because if we are authentic in an unbridled way, and we've talked about this before. If you guys have not heard this live stream on the losing strategies, we did one on unbridled self-expression, which you definitely don't want. That's not to be confused with authenticity, because that makes it unsafe.
Right.
You have to have the truth, but it has to be safe.
Exactly.
At the same time, otherwise you're not creating a climate in which both people can actually be authentic.
Exactly.
If you want to have no fear around speaking your truth, you have to know that, like, well, when they do speak their truth, they're going to do it in a straight up way, but it's not going to be some big dump. And that's another thing. I almost want to draw that line that I mentioned before, is being authentic does not mean being honest about what you think is going on for your spouse. It's being authentic about yourself and the meaning that you give it. Now, you might say the meaning that I give what you did is XYZ, but you're owning your meaning. You're not saying, I know the truth about you, and I'm going to share the truth about you. That's a boundary violation, in my opinion.
Exactly.
I used to be very guilty of that. But I think that going back to, like, knowing what is mine and what is not mine, and being honest, you have to remember that you can't just dump on someone and call that honesty. That's not fair, and that's not actually going to work. It's not going to help them feel safe. And so that's the big missing piece that I feel like a lot of people don't get that.
Yeah.
And it's one of the ways in which they sabotage any efforts to create an authentic relationship.
A lot of people do that with
Yeah.
the meaning making, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think just honoring our partners as the individuals that they are. I think we lose, again, when we get married, it's just like, oh, we need to be, walking like ducks in a row. And it's just like, oh, my partner was a person before we met. She had her own, interest and all those things. Why should she lose those interests just because I say I don't like that, or I don't necessarily agree with that,
Exactly.
It's really gaining full appreciation for who our partner is. Like, we don't necessarily have to agree with everything. It's not necessary, for us to get
We don't have to feel the same way.
Yeah.
But to have that, I think, allowing for differences, you do have to create a relationship, like a culture in your relationship that allows for those differences, so you don't censor yourself and feel like, well, they wouldn't feel that way.
Right.
They wouldn't feel like they need this, or they wouldn't feel like that is hurtful, so I shouldn't feel that way. But we just have to own that. I think the other thing too that I had written down was trust is a really big, important part of creating an authentic relationship, that you have to have the emotional connection and the safety to be able to let your walls down. And part of that trust, I think, can be created through an environment where you say, we accept each other's individual differences.
Yeah.
We own our own meanings of those differences. And we support the individuality and the freedom and the truth-telling of each of us, even if it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's what creates that trust. There has to be permission given for that.
Yeah.
And
I don't think we can
everyone
use
does
our words without it.
Yeah. And everyone does it differently.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of, we were having a conversation, and we were just like, yeah, if some people saw us having a conversation, sometimes they would think it was the end. And it was just like, no, it's just we know each other so well, and we've learned how to communicate at the different levels, and we respect and honor those levels depending on who we're talking to, because we're usually very present to who we're being. But sometimes, like Kelly says, I'm very what do you say? I'm very when you're expressing yourself, I'm very
it depends on who you are. Who am I dealing with in that moment?
She says I'm very passionate, about
Yeah, right. There's so many different styles. Like, there's high conflict styles that, more avoidant couples would look at and be like, oh my God, that's like Armageddon. And for them, it's like, we totally know, we understand each other, and there's no hard feelings here.
Right, exactly.
So you're right that it really does look different. It really does look different, and you have to allow for that. Otherwise, it's not authentic.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point.
Yeah,
really good point.
There are definitely different styles, that's for sure.
Yes. And then the fourth thing that we've touched on already. So we've talked about that you have to have that self-awareness and self-love. You have to have good boundaries. You have to have trust, because you can't really find and use your voice authentically without that. And then you have to have the skilled communication. And I put this last for a reason, because how we teach this in the couples cure is really, first you have to build the foundation of self-love, clear out the limiting beliefs, build the emotional connection, which is really your perceptual filter of each other. Then you can communicate in healthy ways. Being able to listen without judgment, get yourself out of the way, replace judgment with curiosity, make requests instead of complaints, right? You guys mentioned that. Say more about that and the skilled communication that you feel is required to have an authentic marriage.
Well, I believe that every single complaint has a request built in it. So you just have to take that out. And instead of complaining, nagging, own your experience of stuff. Like you mentioned earlier, Monika, own your experience and own your emotions. They are yours. Your experience is yours. And if you don't like something, you make a request on how it can work better for you moving forward instead of complaining. Because we're all, it's super easy to complain, but the request is what makes the difference, because then your partner can show up for you and give you what you're asking for, or decide not to. You know,
it's much more constructive. I totally agree. I think behind every complaint is a request that can be formulated. But sometimes when you ask somebody, well, what do you want instead? What is your request? It takes them a minute, because it's like they're not used to that, right? So that's huge.
Yeah.
I also think another example of a healthy communication is, and an authentic truth telling is when you come forward with like what you really think or what you really want, instead of, like, a lot of people will ask a question that's really a statement in disguise. They're sort of hinting, they're hinting at what they want through a question, like, haven't we already talked about this long enough? Instead of just saying, actually, I'm tired and I feel like I can't talk about this anymore. Like, just say what you really think as a statement, as opposed to asking a question to try to get them to kind of guess. Like, I think that's a classic example of not like an inauthentic way of communicating.
Yeah. Or a lot of times, you know, especially women will be upset, and men do it too. Women will be upset about something, but they're not telling their partner what they're upset about, and they want something that they're not getting, but they're not asking. You know, they're not asking. And a lot of times they make it about, they'll, you know, all kinds of other stuff will turn into a fight, and parallel thoughts will come up, and parallel fights will come up over this one thing that I want that I'm not getting. But I'm not just saying, you know, this is what's bothering me, and this is what will work better for me, and this is what I want.
And one of the skills around the communication, I think, is key also, that I find myself having to help people, is reframing their experience of their partner when they are not necessarily, they are complaining, and reframing that and understanding that they are making a request. It takes a level of maturity to address it that way.
Not to just react to the complaint, but to dig deeper, get curious.
Showing up.
What do they want?
And I mean, like, this is what we experience, especially when people are actually getting started and they're starting to try to utilize the skill of awareness first and foremost, and just looking at their partner where they would usually get triggered by that complaint or response. They go, well, what are they really asking me right now? Because it just getting curious about what do they really need? What are they really looking for right now? You know, a lot of that anxiety around speaking and talking sometimes.
Yeah. And it's so much more constructive. How many times do you hear someone, you ask them, well, have you asked, what is it that you want? Have you asked that? And how many times have you heard the answer, well, they should know that, or it's already clear, or if I have to ask, then it doesn't mean anything. That blows my mind. It's like, I would think that if you ask and then you get it, that means a lot because
Yeah.
they heard you and
Yeah.
they're saying yes to you. How does that not mean anything?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, like when you're talking to someone and they respond in that way, what part of that person are we dealing with? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. I like that.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, because it's not the real them.
Right.
And having an authentic relationship, you want to speak from your highest self and you want to speak to your partner as their highest self. And if for any reason you're not able to do that from highest self to highest self, then it's better to wait and have that communication at a later time.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
also understand that our partners aren't mind readers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why we have to talk and communicate.
This is why we communicate. We're not psychic, or we wouldn't have to use our words at all.
Yeah. Authenticity is about bringing the mature part of ourself in relationship with the immature parts of ourselves and demoting those immature parts of ourselves from being in control of relating with your partner.
Yes.
And
as Terry Real says, putting them in the back seat,
yeah,
fastening the seatbelt, and taking control of the steering wheel from your adult self.
exactly. So that's what it's about. It's about being an adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that self-awareness that you have to have in order to do that.
Yeah, totally.
Well, good. I think this is so, I love this conversation. I think that we've hit on some really important things here. I want to let you guys know that are listening in, whether it's live, I'm not sure if we have any comments or questions, or if you're listening to the recording. If you need support around this, you can book a call at monikahoyt.com/talk. That's monikahoyt.com/talk. And we can talk about a little bit about what are the barriers for you, what is getting in the way of you being authentic, or if you think your spouse isn't being authentic. And we can look at what it would take to create a plan for you given your situation. It's a free call. If it's not a fit to support you, we'll let you know and point you in the right direction. If it is, we can talk about that. But I think with a little bit of courage and a little bit of stretching and leaving your comfort zone, if this is something that you aspire to do and you find that you're just really challenged in being able to like let your real self out and to be free in that way, it'll be so worth it. It only takes like a couple times of really experiencing, like having a taste of that freedom of being truly authentic and having that feel healthy and knowing that you can be authentic and still have a really safe connection.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than that. And it's super motivating. Yeah. So if you can just like stretch out enough to do it a couple times and have a taste of that, that will allow you to continue this journey, peeling off the layers, removing the limiting beliefs, setting a new tone in your relationship, and getting really clear. And this is going to, of course, relate back to the vision. We've done talks on the vision before too, haven't we? So you have to know what you're wanting to create and then how to be authentically you in service of that vision. But that's a different topic. You can do it. If it's something you really want to do and you're committed to learning how to do it, it's just conditioning that has stopped you, and you can recondition yourself. So that's the good news. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for tuning in. Let us know if you have any questions. If you put them in the comments in the group below, we will answer them. So if you don't get a reply in like within a day, just go ahead and tag us, but we'll probably see that when you comment with any questions whatsoever. I'll put the link to book a call below as well. And we will be back next month. We'll do this the first Tuesday of every single month, the three of us. So look forward to seeing you guys next time.